Hi, my name's Melody Hill, and my paper was about Does Your Childhood Affect Your Adulthood? And it's pretty much about how child neglect and child abuse increases the likelihood of a child becoming a criminal or having deviant behavior once they grow older. So, first off, what is child neglect and child abuse? Child neglect is a type of maltreatment towards a child, the lack of providing the child's basic needs like physical, emotional, education, or supervision. And child abuse is when a parent or a caregiver causes serious harm emotionally or physically to their child. So that can be through beating or being emotionally abusive includes like saying harmful words that makes the child want to hurt themselves or become depressed. So in my paper, I discussed the different roles of society that can affect a child through neglect and abuse, and then becoming a criminal. So for the role of the family, in the National Longitudinal Survey of Children and Youth, it said that about 40% of children exposed to violence at a young age become more violent as they grow older. So these children are also at a greater risk of having poor parenting skills, either through neglecting their child or physically abusing their child. So what I was gathering from this information is that neglect is often found in households that the parents where the parents often had a lifetime relationship with substance abuse, whether this is alcohol, drugs, or emotional abuse as well. So, criminals often experienced child neglect as a child by either another family member or a very close friend, someone they looked up to. So, how does this apply to the family, and how does this apply to them becoming a criminal? Well, a lot of times these criminals are actually in jail because of a crime they committed against children because they experienced child neglect and child abuse. That's what Conley and Walloons said in the research that I found. So, children who experience child neglect are often at a greater risk of having child delinquency. And Shuck and Wyndham found this difficult to prove, though, because they believe that there's those few that break the cycle. And what I mean by break the cycle is that there are children that were neglected and abused when they were young, and then they pretty much learned what not to do as a parent. So when they became parents, they refused to fall into that cycle that they were in when they were children, when their parents abused them and neglected them. So they refused to have that, and they decided to break the cycle and not neglect and abuse their children. So Shuck and Wyndham pretty much found it difficult to prove that child neglect as a child affected them becoming a criminal later on. So there's also a big aspect of this is where the overprotective parent comes into play. So you can see this in religious cultures where if you're like in a religious culture and your parents are very overprotective, kind of like the Amish culture, or when your parent is a religious leader, you can see where the children oftentimes act out because when they do have some sort of, I would say, freedom from that religion or from that society, they become more likely to become delinquent and act out. However, a lot of times I didn't talk about that as much. So also, the role of peers is a big impact on child neglect and child abuse and that effect of becoming a criminal. So your peers play more of a role and are more prevalent in your adolescent stage of life just because that's when you're in middle school and high school, and it's really important of who you hang out with. So children who experience neglect and abuse and abusive relationships are often gang up together. They become friends because they have similar experiences. And that's true with the goody goodies and the popular kids. Everybody kind of associates with people they can relate to. So oftentimes the children who experience neglect and abusive relationships often gang up together and act out together in groups. And some researchers said that this is a predecessor to criminal or deviant behavior in an adult life. So the more they act out as a child, a lot of times if they were neglected as children, they don't grow out of that cycle of deviant behavior and it actually becomes more abusive and more violent. So also the roles of peers in a child's life and child neglect and all that is a very controversial topic because some researchers don't believe that peer relationships do have a huge impact on children. Some researchers do and some researchers don't. So this is a really controversial topic because they don't know which one is more important, whether it is the family or the peers that play more an important role in whether someone is more likely to become a criminal or not. So I'm a social work major, so I learned a lot about the child welfare system. And in my classes and through research, I found that children are often in the child welfare system due to neglect and abuse. So a lot of times these children are in foster care systems not because both parents passed away and they became orphans, but more so because these children were neglected and abused and they were removed from the home. So they begin associating with children who experienced abuse and neglect as well. So a lot of times they are kind of forced to be in support groups and self-care groups of people who have experienced the same thing so they can work through those emotions. But sometimes there is a negative effect of this because they learn more so of how to neglect and abuse your child. So these children in the child welfare system, according to DeGue and Wyndham, they're twice as likely to become a criminal or participate in deviant behavior as an adolescent, not just as an adult, but even younger into their teens. And so a big effect on this is the permanent and out-of-home placement. So whether they're in a permanent home, they're less likely to become into deviant behavior because they're not being as neglected. But if they move from home to home, they often become overlooked and forgotten about. So these children act out more so they can get more attention. So when I was doing my paper, I learned that I realized that a theory that we learned in class, the social learning theory, can apply to my research question of if child neglect and abuse can affect someone becoming a criminal or not. And the reason we hear this saying a lot that we are whom we associate with. So criminals associate with criminals and goody-goodies associate with goody-goodies. So a child learns to be neglected because they were neglected. So they learn how to be neglectful to their children because they experience that. They already know how to do that because that's what they lived through. And just like a child learns to be abusive because they were abusive, that's how children associate. They learn and observe how to do something and then they act it out. Children are at a very young age are very repetitive and learn how to associate feelings with actions. And a lot of times in the social learning theory, when we observe criminal behavior, those criminal behaviors are reinforced when it's done by a loved one or family member. So the fact that these children are being neglected and abused by a family member, someone that they trusted, means that there is a more likely chance that they will neglect and abuse their children because it was observed through someone they trusted. Excuse me. So the problems with the research that I found is that the research didn't really discuss the overprotective parents as much as I wanted it to, because these parents are really do put a lot of pressure on their children to succeed and to act a certain way. So when they do get a sense of freedom, they do tend to act out, and they do tend to get involved in deviant behavior and criminal behavior. So I would have liked to learn more about that, but I did learn about child neglect, not so much the overprotective parent. It is kind of the opposite, but I would like to know more about that. And also, the researchers did not discuss this if psychological and emotional abuse children were likely to commit crime. It was just mostly physical neglect and emotional abusive. Physical abuse and neglect. So, also, I would like to know exactly which crimes these children are more likely to are prone to. So the research did talk about that these children are more likely to commit crimes against children, but would that be sexually assaulted crimes, sex offender crimes, or abuse and neglect crimes like they were brought up to be? I would guess that it's more of what they experienced is more likely what they will commit. So here are my references that I used throughout my paper. I used the book a little bit to explain the social learning theory, and I hope you all enjoyed this. I really enjoyed doing this PowerPoint and presentation. I didn't really think there was that much connection between child neglect and criminal behavior, but there really is. I hope you all have a great day.